Great. So welcome to the webinar. If you haven't done so already, feel free to put your name and your organization in the chat. This webinar is specifically for community colleges who are interested in the Heat Pump and HVAC Training Network RFP. So if you think you're here by mistake, feel free to check out the other RFPs on our website. This is for community colleges specifically. I'm going to go around. We have a couple of Mass DEC staff on the call today that'll be presenting. This slide is sort of an overview of our workforce development team. So we're going to call on the members who are here just to introduce themselves briefly. So Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. Jennifer Applam, I'm the Managing Director of Workforce Development, and I will pass it to Elizabeth.
Hey there, this is Elizabeth Youngblood. I'm a Senior Program Manager on the Workforce Development Team, and I'll pass it on to Ben.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Ben Christensen, Program Manager on the Adult and MWBE team, and I'll pass it to Amanda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Slattery. I am a Workforce Development Fellow here at Mass DEC, and I'm going to pass it to Christina.
Thank you. And I am a Program Manager on the Adult Training and MWBE team as well. So just a little bit about our agenda for today. We're going to be going over background information on the RFP, where this funding is coming from, and sort of the overarching goals of it, eligibility criteria, the specific program strands, funding details, selection criteria, the application process and timeline, information about our upcoming office hours and networking, as well as some additional resources. There are Q&A slides scattered throughout the presentation following each section, so you will have an opportunity to come off mute or raise your hand and ask questions there. We also encourage you to ask questions in the chat if you have them. Ben will be monitoring the chat for questions. Okay, so a little bit of background on the Community College Heat Pump and HVAC Training Network. It's a bit of a mouthful. This opportunity represents a little over $14 million in available funding for community colleges to establish or upgrade their heat pump and HVAC training centers, add staff capacity, as well as training seats, establish and grow wraparound and retention supports, and build and scale career pathways in heat pump and HVAC climate critical fields. Additional funding may be added as resources become available to this. And yes, these slides will be available afterwards. I know that's a question that usually comes up early on. So Mass DEC's work spans 4 main areas of climate impact. So we have climate tech and innovation and investment, accelerating decarbonization, large-scale deployment for offshore wind, and clean energy and climate workforce development. So this opportunity falls under this clean energy and climate workforce development area, in which the goal is to grow a diverse and talented clean energy workforce. And I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer to cover some background information on the RFP.
Sure. Thanks so much, Christina. And thanks. I see the questions coming in the chat. Just so you know, we have a break coming up soon. We'll be sure to answer them. Just for a little bit more context and background, one of the reasons why there's such an interest in supporting HVAC and heat pump training, and specifically in the community college network, is that there's such strong statewide demand, and we anticipate even stronger demand. So Massachusetts has a goal of 500,000 heat pump installations by 2030, and that is a goal that ramps up quite rapidly post 2025. And we've already seen really strong demand in the field, and our needs assessment report, which came out a little over a year ago, and we can drop that in the chat too, identified HVAC and our technicians as a potential severe risk for a bottleneck. And we've continued to see that in current data as well. So we see really strong returns on job postings for this, growth that's even outpacing the suggestions that we saw in the needs assessment. One of the other key considerations in all of this is that this is a workforce segment that's significantly older. So over 28% occupation is 55 and older, which if you contrast that with other trades positions, many times you see that number hover closer into the low or mid 20s. So there's significant need for more folks. This is also an opportunity to expand on something that we know is working in other states. Maine has really managed to successfully leverage their community college system to support both new entrants and upskilling. So excited to be talking with all of you about this. If we go ahead and move forward, we'll just cover very basically some of the key pieces that are in the design and build out of this. We've talked about the desire to expand capacity. One of the other things that's not being offered as part of this RFP, but will be offered in a companion RFP, is we are seeking folks to help build out a universal heat pump curriculum that can be a common resource for all of the colleges, community colleges that are participating in this network. This would be a way to help with the upskilling and also anchor some of the instruction that needs to happen in the new entrant space, and also ensure that that curriculum has ESOL supports, which we know can be really particularly important. This was also designed to be able to meet the needs of schools in different places, whether or not they're thinking about offering this from a for credit or a non-credit perspective, ensure that there's really strong support from our team and others in the industry. And then the concept of expanded support services by pairing some of the funding with our equity workforce funds. We also do anticipate potential additional opportunities to cover some of the certifications through some of the federal funding that was offered and that Massachusetts has applied for and received. So we'll go ahead and pass that on.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. So as part of the RFP, there is allocation-based funding with several different categories. Already previously mentioned was the equipment and installation costs for either establishing a new or upgrading an existing training center, funding for staffing capacity for that work, as well as training seat base for the cohorts that would participate in the pilot rounds, as well as wraparound support services as well. We have put some funding aside for additional training seats for organizations that are kind of meeting their capacity, and they're looking to get more funding. That will be something that will be made available as part of kind of rolling RFPs. Programs that aren't ready to apply for implementation funds right now may request between $30,000 and $50,000 for initial planning. We will note that there will be kind of a planning piece to the contracting process. If you think you have some or most of the pieces ready for implementation, you can apply now, and then the kind of planning will be built into that contracting process. But additionally, any funding that is not committed as part of this RFP, we do intend to allocate for both additional training seats for participating applicants. We will also, as part of kind of rolling procurements in the future, we'll have at least one. Those that are conducting a planning grant can come back and apply for competitive procurement through the competitive procurement for implementation based on what is available for our resources. Additionally, if applicants that are currently granted funds are seeking to implement something where they're looking for upskilling, that might be something else we consider, whether that be, going forward with innate or other types of programming that may be part of a future solicitation as well. Great. As was mentioned, we are blending and braiding the funds as part of this funding opportunity. Some of the funding will be coming through our equity funding. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the priority populations that we seek to support as part of our funding. And that includes residences living in low-income communities or environmental justice neighborhoods, individuals with low-income status due to unemployment or underemployment, members of underrepresented communities in the clean energy workforce, current or former workers from the fossil fuel industry, as well as members of federally recognized or state acknowledged tribes. You can take a look. You can look at our, we've got a QR code there for EJ neighborhoods, and there's additional information on our website as well. Thank you. Okay, these are broad level program goals and outcomes. We are looking through this funding to develop a clear framework of industry expectations and priorities for HVAC and heat pump training to be implemented with the community colleges. As was mentioned previously, we'll be putting on RFP to have standardized heat pump training with an ESOL HVAC curricular resource, contextualize ESOL to support new entrants and incumbent workers. Our goal through this funding is to support 500 additional learners through new and expanded programs. We want to implement through our collaboration with community colleges best-in-class program outcomes, which is seeking 80% completion rate, 70% placement, 60% 6-month job retention rate. That's kind of a best-in-class goal. And as well as working with community colleges to find a sustainable pathway for these programs to continue to be applied and expanded over time and scaled. Great. This is just talking through a little bit of the implementation phase. Right now, we are, right in the middle of the active solicitation process. Applications will be due in mid-February. We will be reviewing those applications for completeness, and we will be, announcing awards and going through the contracting process starting in kind of the March through June timeframe. Where we will be kind of the selected participants will be launching their programs and starting either with that planning grant or with the planning process for their training facility build outs as well. Based on kind of the timeline for those build outs, looking at late fiscal year 25 into fiscal year 26 for that initial training cohort to launch, as well as the release of an additional RFP to fund expanded seats and upskilling opportunities, and potentially for any planning grants, potentially the opportunity to apply for implementation funding. Fiscal year 2027 and beyond, we will refine the program animal, the model based on feedback from our participants, as well as, again, available funding. Great. Who is eligible to apply? This was mentioned at the onset, but applicants must be one of the 15 Massachusetts community colleges. As was added in the chat, there are links to our equity as well as climate critical RFPs, where applicants that are not community colleges can apply for funding to either create or expand HVAC and heat pump training capacity in Massachusetts. One thing that we'll note is that we strongly encourage partnerships between community colleges and other entities. That is something that we think could add value and could lead to a very comprehensive proposal. As part of the application, you should be very clear about who's leading the application team as the lead applicant, and then also disclose any potential conflicts of interest. Great. These are just some examples of potential partners that could add value to the proposition for your application and for your program. Community colleges, which are the main applicant here. These are basically some of the components that they can take lead on, or also looking at your local Mass Higher Career Center. They can be supporting in offering recruitment for your HVAC training program, as well as the assessment to see if it's a good fit for participants, placement support with employers, or retention support. You may already have employer partners within your current programs. Mass CC can also help support in finding partners within your region to help with figuring out what the technical skill requirements are, as well as placement and retention support, and offering pathways to well-paying jobs. There are also workforce development nonprofits, as well as social service communities, community organizations that can support you in various ways. So again, thoughtful partnerships can strengthen your proposal. With that, I think we'll open it up to first round of question and answer.
Yeah, and we already have some in the chat, so maybe we can tackle those first. I want to make sure that, okay, so I think the first one I'm seeing is about applying for planning grants. So it was, the question was, if you're applying for a planning grant, how and when can we apply for additional implementation funds when we are ready? And when would that be awarded? Nancy, did you want to speak to that further? Or
yeah, I thank you. I guess so. I'm from Bunker Hill Community College, and we don't have an HVAC or anything. We don't have an HVAC program currently. So we were curious, if we apply for a planning grant, but not an implementation grant right away, and the funds are being redistributed. We just weren't sure about the timeline. Like, we were interested in applying for a planning grant and then an implementation grant, but we're not, so I was just curious how that would work.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that.
Thank you.
So if you apply to start with a planning grant, we anticipate that the next RFP release related to this opportunity would be in the sort of later FY25 time period. So,
Okay.
I'm sorry, actually early fall is what I'm looking to say. So that should line up with most planning grants. We find folks need about 6 months. And when we think about contracting, but it would also be open during that sort of time period. So you can start to look at it again. So we do anticipate another RFP opening in the fall. And in addition to that, we also will have, this is a pretty ongoing priority. So even outside of this designated funding that's set aside by DOER, it's a core priority in all of the annual funding that we have as well.
Okay, actually, can I pass this over to my colleague Steve Roller, because I think he had related questions. Thank you.
Thanks, and I think maybe maybe I have more of a comment than a question. I understand the process as you're laying it out. As Nancy said, Bunker Hill doesn't have an HVAC program, and there's a lot of groundwork that we need to do. There's a lot of opportunity for us here, but there's a lot of groundwork that we need to do to be able to roll out a good program. We don't have a space for an HVAC program. We would need to find space to lease or find a partner who has available space that could be used for this purpose. That's going to take time to explore those options, and a myriad of other issues, right? So it looks like the process, as you've laid it out here, is that at this stage, each college has an amount of funding that's designated to that college for planning and implementation. And if we're not ready to pursue an implementation grant now, then the process becomes competitive. And we have to, the amount of funding that's been designated to this college for implementation would then be thrown into a pot where all the colleges are competing for that funding. That strikes me that there's a fairness issue there. There's something that is questionable about that. Yeah. If just one other thing, have you considered a two-stage process where you often have a two-stage process in these kind of competitions where an initial application for a planning grant and a application later when you're ready to propose an implementation plan?
Steve, so let me tell you something about the follow-on procurement that I think might address your concern.
Jennifer, I'm sorry. It's very hard to hear you.
Yeah, your audio is a little choppy.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. Hopefully I'll speak louder and then I can always call in a moment. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So when we say that the next round is competitive, we are generally talking about the fact that when we're talking about extra seats, that it would need to be competitive in that. And also, when you think about it as like money being potentially thrown into a general pot, the money that's set aside for implementation, as long as there's indications that colleges are trending towards implementation, meaning they've applied for planning, we would offer those pots in separate strands so that future implementation that can start a new program up doesn't get blended with funding for continuation of programs and undercut the opportunity for those future programs. Does that make some sense based on what you're asking?
Yes.
Well, if I understand what you're saying, that the future rounds would be sort of broken up between support for existing programs and then implementation funding for, programs coming on board. Yes. That second competition still sounds like a competitive process where funding would be sort of, combined from sort of, unallocated funds from the first round. I guess what I'm asking about is, at this stage, it looks like the college has funds that are designated to this college for an implementation, an implementation process. And if we're not ready to apply for an implementation grant now, it seems like we sort of forfeit that, or,
No,
no,
no.
that it's no longer designated to this college.
So the goal of this is to support HVAC programming across the system. So,
Sorry, Jennifer, I can't hear you.
okay, I'm going to ask someone else on the team to take another question while I dial in some other way.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, were there any other questions in the chat?
Yeah, let me just, so we had a question from Shelley. When is the universal curriculum that is expected to be developed going to be available? That is to be determined as we're working to procure a curriculum developer. So we haven't gotten to that stage yet to be able to have a sense of when that curriculum would be available.
Yes, but it is intended to be available within a timely period so that it can be built into community colleges framework and also their kind of implementation of the curriculum design. So it's not meant to be, we'll have it in the next couple of years. It's proceeding in a timely manner. We don't have the exact time on when it will be available, but we're moving forward with it quickly so that it can be basically put into use by community colleges.
And then Elizabeth, kind of a follow on that is, will the industry recognized credentials that are required in the RFP be included in the universal curriculum that is going to be developed? So the hot work safety, EPA 608, the NATE certification.
The NATE certification is an upskilling credential. So that would be not part of the curriculum per se. That would be, I think, if you see NATE certification, that might be if a applicant is looking to offer upskilling to current HVAC workers or something like that. Let's see. I think that the answer is yes. Sorry. For anything that's like a fundamental certification, including EPA 608, that would be included in the referenced at least in the universal curriculum within the kind of framework, because that is a requirement to go into the space. The hot work safety program, I'm less knowledgeable about, but we will check into that.
We'll have several other times for Q&A, so I think that we can table some of the questions that we have, just looking at what some of the questions are that are in the chat. Some of them might be answered in this next section, so if they're not, then we can use the next Q&A break to then address those.
Thanks, Ben. And I don't think Jennifer was able to call in. Is that correct? From her phone or something? I don't see an extra like number listed or anything.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Oh,
Does my audio continue to be bad?
no,
it
your
sounds
audio
good.
is good. So if you want to finish answering that one question, then we can go to the next section.
I think we did largely describe what future rounds of procurement would look like. So go ahead and move on, and then we'll be sure to take additional follow-up questions.
Okay. Okay,
We're
so
talking a
passing it
little-
to Ben. Sorry.
Thanks, Christina. So we're talking about the program stand. So you'll see on the application that there are two separate distinct strands. So strand A is the implementation strand. So that encompasses all of the components, including equipment and infrastructure, staffing, training slots, and supportive services. The award range for strand A, encompassing all of those components, is between 100,000 and 1.2 million. The planned award duration would be 12 to 30 months. When you are developing budgets and program planning, please be aware that there would be an additional year of post-program monitoring and metrics tracking, so that you should plan and budget for that. Strand B is the planning award. So those are smaller grants, obviously in the $30,000 to $50,000 range, and with a planned duration of 6 months to 1 year. Cost share is not required, but always encouraged from a sustainability standpoint. And both strands are supported by Mass EC technical assistance, which will assist, especially when you're in the planning phase, to help work through challenges or issues or partner development, and then through the implementation phase, supporting you, ensuring that you're hitting milestones and that your program is on the track towards success. So Strand A has several components that I mentioned briefly in the previous slide. So component A would be the equipment, the installation, program design to establish or upgrade HVAC and heat pump training centers. So for community colleges without an existing training center, this would allow them to purchase and install equipment, either, and then upgrade existing spaces and develop curriculum. Community colleges must demonstrate that the training centers are equipped to provide instruction on heat pumps and mini split installation. And then for community colleges with an existing training center, these funds under component A can be used to expand training capacity, especially as it relates to heat pump and mini split installation. Component B is your staffing capacity support to add key staff capacity to support the build out or expansion of the training centers. And just as a side note, that funding for case management to support participants through intake, training, placement, and retention can come from both component B and also, which we'll talk about in a moment, component D. Component C covers the tuition costs for training seats in non-credit bearing training programs. So this essentially is just funding training slots with new entrant training seats at a maximum cost of $8,500 per seat. Applicants may also apply to serve a mix of new entrants and upskilling incumbent workers. Community colleges that offer credit-bearing programs can support tuition costs through Mass Reconnect and Mass Educate. Component D is the wraparound and support services funding. So this is to provide participants with stipends, address barriers such as childcare, transportation, fees to get a driver's license, programs to support individuals with GED, ABE, ESL, things of that. Additional information can be found on what some of these potential barriers are for our priority populations on page 4 of the RFP. And next slide, please. And I believe I'll be passing it to Jennifer.
Thanks, Ben. I won't spend time reading through everything here because it's dense and it's in the RFP, but one thing we wanted to highlight and draw your attention to was the RFP does include these information about considerations in terms of program design, including recommendations about space. Wanted to note that the space recommendations were based on desktop research, conversations with existing training providers, and feedback from industry experts in the equipment supply space. So depending on how many students you're trying to serve and the models in which you're deploying in terms of equipment, folks often find that they will need at least 1,500 square feet, if not 2,000 plus. There are training centers, though, that have managed it with smaller footprints. And so that's something that if that's a constraint, you can certainly work through, but it may take additional thought and planning on that. In terms of the electrical specifications and electrical panel, again, looking at the type of equipment that you're going to bring in there, in many cases, you're going to find that you would need more than your standard outlets. And so it's important to consider those in terms of the supply and design of the space. We've talked a little bit about those industry recognized credentials, and I wanted to just put a finer point on a question earlier related to that. So when we talk about the curriculum that Mass CC is going to procure and have built out, that really will be focused on heat pump install and repair. But alongside that, we also have a framework built out that will support the full HVAC learning in terms of pointing to the key pieces that need to be covered in a quality HVAC instruction, including pointing to these certifications that are requirements and the right resources for them. So there's a little bit of a nuance there between framework and then full sets of lessons. The lesson component is more focused on the heat pump install, and the framework approach recognizes that in many cases there's already existing local curricula that really covers the broader HVAC instruction well, and we're not trying to supplant that. So you can take a look at this section. If we can go forward, you'll see that the next slide covers also additional considerations, many of which are likely currently part of your practice when you think about workforce development program design, whether it's ensuring strong career fit or retention and placement outcomes. But these are things that we're hoping are top of mind for everyone. Go forward.
Thanks, Jennifer. So talk a little bit about Strand B and planning grants and what are some of the eligible uses for funding. So they can be used for partner development, identifying partners for supportive services or other case management functions, clarify which curricular resources will be used for implementation of your training, for planning the implementation schedule for programming and building out a calendar, and any staff time devoted to program planning. Activities that are not eligible for funding can include costs associated with preparing the grant proposal, purchase of equipment intended for general operating purposes, so anything that's outside of HVAC, heat pump, or mini split training programming, or any activities that occur before or following the term of an awarded grant. Next slide, please. So for Strand A, training outcomes, successful applications will include clear milestones that indicate successful completion for individual participants. So off-ramps, which could be attainment of industry-recognized credentials or licenses. They would include case management that successfully removes barriers for participants, both while in training and during their employment retention phase. Clear placement into a clean energy occupation, the job retention piece for at least 1 year post-program completion, and increased wages or other status changes, including title change or additional supervisory responsibilities for incumbent workers. And then they would also include description of plans to engage the relevant partners to provide the off-ramps for participants. So we would want to see with employer partners, a comprehensive placement strategy that includes dedicated job development staff through the lead applicant or a partner, and with supported by letters of support from employers where applicable. And for on the equipment piece under component A, successful applications will include a clear initial vision of the equipment, so description of the building out of the capacity to support that would be supported by this equipment funding, and the measured steps to select, procure, and integrate this new capacity. And then the follow-on of that is the impact of the equipment. So description of how the equipment will improve your programming, how it will build upon existing training, improve curriculum, and other training opportunities at the college. And then also how this equipment is helping to fill in some of those programmatic gaps that need to be addressed with this equipment. And we'll pause here again for some Q&A.
Yeah, I'm just looking back in the chat to see ones that we might have missed too. So there was a question about awarding multiple implementation grants. We certainly do anticipate awarding multiple implementation grants in this RFP and through the follow-on RFP that we're planning. In terms of, there's a question here about, could we speak more about cost share and wraparound services? Noreen, did you want to elaborate on what types of information you're hoping for there?
Sure, so as far as the cost share, I do know that it's all encouraged and not required, but did you have any more insight into, you know, a rough guideline as to what would be competitive in terms of the cost share and maybe what type of cost share? And then
Yeah, so I would say, again, like this, because this is allocation based, one thing to note is that applicants are really being measured against, you know, have they turned in a complete application that addresses all the questions, not necessarily one applicant has more cost share than another. One common avenue for cost share that we would encourage everyone to look into is whether any local install and maintenance businesses in your area or any of the heat pump manufacturers are interested in helping to supply additional equipment or resources. In many cases, the answer to that is yes. We found that most of the time when folks reach out, it's very common for there to be people in the region that are in the install and maintenance space that will have old equipment that they, you know, are happy to donate as a training, and that also manufacturers are eager to have some of the equipment featured as a training. So that's a good example of an in-kind cost share that is frequently easy to obtain, and also then can help schools, you know, really think through how to use the remaining funding in the way that best benefits students.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful on that. Yep.
And the wraparound services, what else would you like to know?
Yeah, on that, I guess it's more, I mean, the RFP is pretty detailed, but I guess it's more how heavily is that weighing into the application overall compared with the other components?
So really, the concept in terms of offering these wraparound support services is about allowing local colleges to meet the needs that they know are within the communities they're trying to serve. So it isn't so much that we anticipate that every participant or every learner needs all support services, but that we're eager to help schools and their partners think through what types of support services make sense to have be on offer. And so that's sort of the perspective there, is to ensure that there's at least some funding to get going on that. And then also that's certainly a point of conversation and support as we think about follow-on funding.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Just looking at other things that we might have, somebody asked, is the use of the universal curriculum a requirement, or can we use HVAC curriculum that is already developed? You can absolutely use existing curricula as long as it still meets the goals and as long as it's aligned with, you know, a robust framework of competencies related to the HVAC instruction and heat pump install. We will ask all grantees to send at least one representative to the training when we roll out the curricula, so that you can be fully aware of it and decide, you know, to what extent it can support your programming. But it does not have to supplant existing high quality curricula that schools may have or may partner to receive. How much detail do we want to see for a planning grant? With a planning grant, really and we went through this a little bit, but we're looking to understand the steps that you anticipate to take to plan the program and who the key partners are that you're hoping to engage, at least at the category level, and with some examples. So we wouldn't expect you to know all the employer and industry partners that you'll engage, but we would expect you to offer some insights about how you might go about that. And similarly, we wouldn't expect you to have a full detailed timeline and what your course offering would look like, but we would expect you to be able to reflect on the process that your college tends to engage in to design new offerings and what you found useful and would be applicable in this case. Nancy, did you want to add detail to that question? I see the hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered it, but you know, we only have a couple of weeks to do this. So we might have some partners, but could we mention potential partners and how, I mean, obviously the work of the planning grant is to finalize all of that and solidify it. So would that be okay if we can say we're in discussion with X, Y, and Z, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I mean, essentially we're looking for intent, early planning consideration, and some core steps, you know, will be meaningful to engage in.
Okay.
in your design.
Thank you.
The question about additional year beyond the 30 months. So it depends on how many cohorts you're anticipating having over what time period. So in the way that the components are set up, we talk about the tuition and support services meant to support a minimum of 30 participants. For some schools, depending on how big their training space is or how large their student population demand is, that could take multiple years, and therefore getting to that final year of follow-up for the last cohort might extend your contract beyond 30 months. For others, you might find that you can fit in your planning ramp, your first cohort, your second cohort, and have a year of follow-up for those two cohorts and still be within 30 months. So the 30 months is sort of a framing guidance, but it sort of depends also how you anticipate rolling it out. And that would be something that would get finalized through contracting. In terms of partnering with another community college and having one handle one type of training and then the other, certainly we would encourage partnership considerations, especially in places where, you know, the geographic proximity makes it realistic. In terms of dividing HVAC in general versus heat pump, the one thing I would say is that we would want any new entrant HVAC training to also include heat pump. So we wouldn't want new entrants to not get those services. As for combining the total allocations, the applications with the allocations do need to be separate, but the strategy and the impact could be combined and articulated through the application. And we would just, you know, need that signaled to us so that we would be sure that anyone looking at those applications looked at them side by side to understand the full plan.
Thank you.
Nancy, is that good, or did you want to add to that?
No, that's good. I'm sorry we're if Bunker Hill's asking, or me, that I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'm sorry. Can I just go back? This is the next question I posted, but I'm still a little fuzzy. If we applied for a planning grant now and applied for an implementation grant later in the, you know, with the next RFP, would we still be eligible for our total initial allocation, or will that have changed because funds might be reallocated?
So we never are in the practice of saying exactly what's going to be in a future RFP, but I can say with certainty that the design here is to preserve the scope and the level of funding that's needed to set up new programs.
Okay.
It's fully possible that the exact number might get adjusted a little or even increased depending on other braided funding. But certainly we wouldn't want anyone to enter into a planning grant and then find that suddenly the most they could get for implementation was $500,000, and we know that wouldn't be realistic. So
yeah,
exactly. I think we're looking to keep parity with the offering that we have here, but also work with additional incoming funds and the state of play, because there may be campuses that signal they're not interested at all, which could change the way that we can look at allocations.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful.
Hi, can I ask a quick question? I'm from Quinsigamond, and our program is not new, but our location will likely be. Does that mean that we have to add the heat pump to our existing curriculum, even though the program itself is not new?
So this funding specifically is coming from DOER, so you would need to show that the program includes heat pump instruction. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to change it, but if you were to talk to the instructors and find that there was no current coverage of that topic, then you would need to work towards adding that through this process.
Okay, can we do that over the 30 months, or does it have to be done at the outset?
I think we can work through that in contracting. We probably wouldn't want it done at the very tail end, but we also would be realistic that it takes time to change programming and curriculum, and so that can be part of a scoping plan.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep. Going back to the costs associated with a proposal, what that means is you can't retroactively charge the costs associated with this proposal. if you are applying for a planning grant and part of what you would want to do is have a consultant help you develop your implementation grant, that's an acceptable cost to scope into your planning grant.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we've covered everything that was in, and I think we have at least one more section of content. Christina, do we have one more or two more? Because we're running out of time.
We have two more. There's yours
right.
and then there's mine at the end.
So we'll try and go a little faster through this content just to leave a few minutes for any final questions. So this was my section. It gives you the high level look at the allocation chart based on the questions. I think many of you are already familiar with this. And Christina, am I stepping on your toes? Is this yours or mine? Okay.
No, this is yours.
Great. We didn't include the whole chart here, but you can see the thinking behind the chart of us trying to understand in advance schools that maybe had an existing program, what type of program, and also whether or not they had existing equipment. So there is some differences in the way those were allocated. One note is that we couldn't cover every last contingency. So there may be things that you're thinking of that you go, well, our school would need a little more funding for XYZ reason. That's why there's an ability to request an additional 200,000 on top of the allocation, as long as it doesn't exceed 1.2 million. So folks who already have an allocation of 1,080,000, you can't add another 200 entirely. You can add 120. But if you're at a lower allocation and you can provide a justification, you can go ahead and add that. The indirect is not on top of these, but it is an allowable cost within these categories. We didn't try to break indirect out separately because we know in some cases folks have different federal approved indirect rates and it would have made the chart quite complicated, but we do expect to see indirect to be budgeted in alongside the costs related to these, especially the costs that imply indirect in your current statutes. I'm not going to talk through the criteria too much because I think we've actually gotten to it, but I would encourage you to take a closer look. And just to add the reminder that when we talk about criteria, we're talking about these applications being looked at for completeness as opposed to competition with one another. And so if we see things that are missing based on criteria, we may ask for a meeting or for follow-up questions, but it does not mean one institution will get funding and then another would not get any funding. And we'll go forward. And again, I'll just encourage you to look at these on your own and underscore that the criteria for planning grants is obviously quite different, which I spoke to in an earlier question, that we're really looking for the beginning of the process, the approach, and some quality indicators of what's worked in your local setting before and what you would apply here.
Okay, and I'm gonna skip past this Q&A section.
We'll just do one final one.
Yeah. Okay, so just going into a little bit more detail on the application process. So first step is to review the RFP. This presentation did a good job of summarizing a lot of what's in there, but there are more details in the actual RFP itself. So take a close look at that. We also have upcoming office hours that a further slide is going to talk more about. There's 2 upcoming sessions. So if you have leftover questions that you're not able to ask here, we encourage you to come to those. And then in addition to that, you can always share questions with the RFP workforce inbox. So the email is listed right on this slide. And the applications are due on February 19th at 11:59 p.m. So on the funding landing page, you'll see the application packet outlined. So attachments 1, 2, and 3 are items that need to be completed and submitted. So attachment 2 is the actual application form. Attachment 3 is the budget. And then attachments 4, 5, and 6 are more so like reference documents. So we have a sample grant agreement, a sample progress report, as well as that funding allocation chart that Jennifer just went over. So pay close attention within each attachment. There's instructions as well as like samples. So I'll talk through some of those when it comes to the budget on the next slide. And then any MOUs or letters of support can be submitted and attached to attachment 2. Any additional documents outside of these won't be considered as part of review. Okay, so just to go a little bit more into the budget and attachment 3. So in that one Excel document, there's different tabs of the budget. So there's the program budget is one tab, then there's a project timeline tab, and then a go or no-go metrics tab. The program budget is broken down by personnel costs, and fringe direct programmatic costs, which includes things like materials and subcontractors. And then there's the indirect cost line item that Jennifer also talked a little bit about. So if you do have an indirect cost rate that's different than the federal de minimis, please submit documentation along showing that. And you can also include information in there about how your indirect is calculated. There is a matching funding column to indicate a cost share, and that is optional as we described, but it is helpful to see if you have it. And there's another column that's sort of like a narrative column within the budget. It's really helpful when applicants fill that out and describe sort of next to each staff what that member is actually doing on the project. If you're providing stipends, for example, a little description of, how much each stipend is per how many participants is also really helpful. So please, provide as much detail there as you can. The project timeline tab does have an example project schedule. I think the example in there goes through like 2028, but obviously the length of the timeline is going to be dependent upon your project. And the go or no-go metrics also has an example there. Included in that table. We keep those tables pretty simple in terms of enrollment, completion, placement, and retention, as well as average starting wage. And that's broken down by cohort. And you'll see in the example, the 80, 70, 60% goals are included there as well. Okay, a little bit about timeline. So you can send questions to the RFP workforce inbox that's ongoing through February 5th. Obviously, this is the pre-application webinar today. And then the upcoming office hours will be on January 27th and February 3rd from 11 to 12. The links to register for those are included in this PowerPoint, but also on the funding landing page. Proposals are due February 19th. And then following the proposals as part of our review, if we have additional questions for you, you may receive questions via email or be called in for an interview by the team, depending on what we think is an easier way to get the answers, depending on the questions. The notification of awards, we're hoping to take place in March, and the contracting in April this year. So yeah, a little bit more about office hours. Like I said, the information for these is on the landing page. There's 2 upcoming ones. They're drop in, drop out. You could come to one of them or both of them, whatever makes sense for you. And it's also a good chance to meet other potential applicants. Some people come to these just to listen, looking to make partnerships, things like that. So you're welcome to attend any of these at any time. And then
I was going to suggest that we skip this and that folks can refer to these things on their own time.
Okay. Sounds good.
One question I saw that was in the chat was about the indirect rate and whether you have to use a federal negotiated rate. If you have one, you do not have to, but you can apply it here with documentation. So it's really up to the decisions of your financial officers as to which indirect rate they would want to see applied. And if we have any other questions, we're happy to take them in this moment. Okay, well, if you have one, interrupt, but I think we did invite the internship team to share their opportunities. So maybe if we scroll past that. And Cassia, if you're still on with us and you want to share about these, we'd really appreciate that in the last few moments.
Sure, yeah, happy to hop on quickly. You can scan the QR code for more information, but just wanted to give a quick announcement that our Clean Energy Internship Program, which is open to college students, graduate students, recent graduates, so a lot of your community college students would be eligible for this. Matches students with clean energy employers throughout the state in paid internships. And our summer session will be opening in February, so stay tuned, it's coming soon. And in the summer, employers get reimbursed up to $8,640 per intern. You can move on to the next slide, Christina. And then also wanted to bring up our technical trades work and learning program, which is open to vocational high school after dark CTI students and approved programs by us. And this is focused on more technical focused jobs in the clean energy sector. And unlike our standard program, it runs throughout the academic year and into the summer. So the goal is to match technical students with these jobs as well. And yeah, feel free to scan the QR code for more information or reach out to internships@masscec.com. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Cassia. Christina, did you want to just share next steps as we close out?
Yeah, so next steps would be if you have any additional questions following this webinar, feel free to send them to the workforce inbox listed here, as well as attend our upcoming office hours. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
When will the slides be available? And where, I guess?
So they will get posted to the RFP website page. Christina, does that usually take 3 days?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check with Maeve.
Okay, so we will check. If our comms team is behind and it's going to take a little longer, then we'll probably send an email blast out as well. But if you don't get an email blast from us in the next 2 days, it means that they're going to be online on the RFP page. And they will be in both places. It's just sometimes if comms is backed up, we need to allow for a little more time.
Okay. Thank you. And
Thank
the
you,
answers,
everyone.
it looks like the answers to today's session will be published. Those only go up twice a month.
Yes, we apply. So when you email us a question, we answer your direct question right away, but then
Yeah.
we publish all the questions and all the answers we've received every other week.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us. Take care and have a good rest of the afternoon. Do you think
Do you need us
oh,
for
we
anything?
should stop the recording?